One of the questions I'm getting quite a lot of people from people is about cameras and whether the technology has changed in the last 5 years. I mean, if I held up my iPhone, we'd know that in the last 5 or 10 years, the picture's significantly different. What about for security cameras? What are you telling people, Kevin, about security cameras?
Yeah, not only are we seeing much higher resolutions as far as the quality and the clarity that you'll get from an image, but you're also getting intelligence that's built into cameras now. And so they're able to distinguish the difference between a raccoon and a person who hops a fence. You're able to get that. You're also able to get the ability to see bright, colorful images in almost pitch black darkness. And so there's been several advances in cameras over the last several years.
Yeah, I think those are definitely the two biggest would be not necessarily just the like amount of pixels you have. Like cameras were good a couple of years ago, but people typically don't need to see what's happening in their yard in the middle of the day, right? It's how they look at night. I think that's been one of the biggest shifts. And then how easily you can go see that. Like I know on my cameras 5 years ago, anything that happened in my yard, a box blowing through the yard, a blade of grass moving gave me an alert. And so when something did happen or something went missing off the porch, it was almost impossible to figure out what it was. Like they just weren't user friendly.
Is that technology either called Starlight? I heard Starlight or something. Is that different from that?
Yeah, Starlight, I think, is, I don't know if it was a proprietary term, but that's definitely the idea of kind of having a brighter image based on just having a more sensitive chip in your camera as opposed to
Mhm.
having to switch over to using, infrared light, which infrared light just makes it really hard to tell what's happening in an image because it's really hot in the middle and it fades on the edges and it makes things really hard to distinguish. You just kind of see those moving blobs.
Yeah.
With Starlight, you get a lot more sensitive image. And now some of our manufacturers are even going to a Starlight that's so sensitive and AI that's so good, they can give you color at night, which I think is really cool. That's how we see the world. It's nice that our cameras are starting to do that too.
That's right. Yeah, the old sensors basically made like this green haze that went around your face, and it kind of reminds me of like an old, I don't know, military or army movie or something like that, where you see a night vision
And then
goggle
they
set
had
that goes
night
over the eyes.
goggles. Yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you see green haze and bubbles of people out in the distances, right?
Well, and it made it so hard to place cameras because if your camera got anywhere near an eave or a tree grew near it, it would start to reflect that IR light back into the camera. And so you would have this constantly changing, like
Mhm.
you were just chasing, keeping the cameras always in the right spot or having to lower them down out of an eave. But then they became more visible, but it worked better. And it felt like something you were always working around. It wasn't working with you.
Yeah.
So
Not only did we have
would
to
you
avoid where trees were going to be planted so that we didn't have them blocked by that, but we had to be aware of where floodlights were going to be on the house because we
Yep.
couldn't have those turn on at night and then all of a sudden go blind for, 2 or 3 minutes while they were trying
do
to
we ever
adjust to
go
the
back
flood.
to clients and move the cameras because trees? I mean, is that a request we get ever?
Yeah. We've been around long enough for that to happen now.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say if you do it right at the beginning and you really try to layer what the surveillance plan is going to look like versus what the landscape plan is going to be like, you can try to accommodate those changes and make sure that that looks good. Inevitably, though, if we do have cameras on eaves or on walls or different places and foliage grows, there's adjustments that need to be made. Not only that, there's also just general maintenance that has to be done, right? Because these are outside, and just like a light fixture can get a cobweb that goes across it, so can a camera. And so we have to make sure that we're also maintaining them, just from wiping them down and making sure that lenses don't have water droplets on them, or that there aren't bugs and cobwebs and things
Mhm.
like that go over to it. So it's just like what normal maintenance would be on a regular home. And so we'll have the maintenance of that side of it as well as being cognizant of the growth of the different landscape that's
Well, I think
around our field of view as well.
one of the things that I think our clients deal with that maybe somebody that's just doing a do-it-yourself camera solution doesn't is our systems tend to have a lot of cameras. Like they kind of start at 4 to 8 and go up from there. And I think while on the AI side, we were kind of playing catch up with the do-it-yourself type systems. I think that's one of the things that we do really, really well is allow you to cover an entire property, see every corner, see every angle. But now we're finally making it where it is easy to use. I feel like, I mean, I just, if we're being honest, I feel like that is where we lagged behind, was making it easy to jump on your app and see your cameras, or to go look at footage really quickly. I just feel like we're getting a lot better at that now.
Yeah. Even just simply the app development that follows the camera systems around now is much more intuitive, right? We saw the do-it-yourself market come up with different products that were available, whether it's Nest or Canary or Ring. And those products were so simple. They were really smart and really easy to use. And you could jump right into an app and have all that information at your fingertips in a very simple way. And what we had and what we were deploying, while probably better in the grand scheme of things and how it can integrate with their whole systems that were going together, really didn't give you that functionality and the simplicity of it. And so now we've seen those apps and the way that we interface with our camera systems be much easier and much more user friendly, and allow us to get to the information we want to get. Who doesn't want to just be able to check on their kids while they're in the pool in the backyard if you're checking on something like that? And so we can have really the best of both worlds now with better products and ease of use.
One of the things though that the rings and the did really well was make, as you say, make it accessible. Whereas many of the systems we're actually either recording on locally or on the cloud. What's the sort of state of art for people who want to keep a recording of their own home system?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's kind of twofold, right? One is, as we progress into this world where more of our information is out in the cloud, it also kind of exposes us to the ability for, either being hacked and someone getting into that information. We certainly allowed ourselves to have less control of where that's stored. And so the ability to have that on site sometimes is a big benefit, and it's helpful and it's more secure and more private. Alternatively, if it's stored on site, if somebody were to break in and steal that, well, then now you don't have that backup in the cloud. And so there's not a secondary kind of place there. And so I think there really is kind of a balance on what makes sense. And it might be different for different families. If you're concerned about privacy, you probably stick with it being in your home. And if you're more concerned about having backups, then a cloud backup is a smart thing as well.
Yeah. And I like the flexibility of edge recording, which simply means that we can record stuff at the devices. So now we can record onto like a micro SD card and then also record onto the DVR. So if somebody really were worried about somebody breaking in and stealing the equipment, well, a small amount of that footage, I mean, multiple days, typically, sometimes weeks, will still be on each individual device and still accessible. And then cloud storage is an option as well. But what I've found, even with my, slightly more dated system, is I can get to my footage remotely so easily that it might as well be cloud, right? Unless my internet's down at home, it doesn't really matter to me. It just kind of works, which is how I feel about my, we have a Ring system at a second property. And that's the one thing I liked about it, was it always just kind of worked. But it wouldn't work if I wanted 4, 6, 10, 15 cameras. So
right.
That's a big difference.
And if you upgrade those cameras for better quality cameras at a higher pixel ratio, does that mean you have to upgrade the storage device, your central storage device as well?
Yeah. So there's a couple factors you look at when you're talking about internal storage. Is that, one, you talk about the longevity, how long do I want to actually record these? And then secondly, at what level and quality do I want to record the images that are coming out of it? And so if the higher the image quality and the longer you want, the more storage you need. And so that's constantly an evolution. As you're adding cameras into the system or as you're upgrading cameras, we certainly need to look at what the record times look like on that and make sure that we're addressing that in addition to the cameras themselves.
And for the most part, that analytics and the ability to, like Kevin said, distinguish between a child on a bicycle and a car and a child not on a bicycle and an animal, a lot of that does live on the storage device. So upgrading that for a lot of clients, especially if they're not having issues with their cameras at night, that actually is probably where they want to spend the most money.
And so the last question for me is, I live in a place where lots of people want to know whether people can monitor their cameras other than themselves. And I have to keep explaining to people that, monitored cameras are great, but you have to pay somebody to monitor them. And I know AI can do some of them, but in reality, much of this stuff isn't for real-time response. It's for us to action forensic analysis of what went on when it comes to the recording stuff, not necessarily the stuff looking at your pool. What do we find the state of what people want is?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Nigel, there are services that will monitor your cameras. They're not watching your cameras full time. When an event happens and they get an alert that comes out of them, they'll sign in, they'll look at it, and they'll go, "Oh no, that's just the yard crew that's typically there every week. That's not an issue. We're not worried about that." And so they'll let that go, right? But at the same time, if there is something that's weird, and there are people who are walking along the face of the house and looking in windows and peering in, that's not a normal behavior that happens on a property. And then they can actually, one, speak to them and say, "Hey, we noticed that you're looking in the house. That's not allowed. You need to move away." Or, "We've got the police on the way. Please leave the property immediately." And you can have those alerts that come out of it. And for some people, that's very important, and that's a nice thing. Imagine living on a golf course, or a property that might be exposed, where someone can come up behind a bayou or a lake or something like that, and having the ability to have that alert come out of it can really be proactive in nature as opposed to reactive in nature, right? And so if you're willing to do that, and that's a concern that you have, there are a lot of services that do that and do that well. There are some intelligence, a lot of the intelligence that's built into cameras can provide smarter alerts. And so if you didn't want to pay for a service, but you wanted to be able to eliminate a tree branch moving or a car that's driving by, and be able to filter that down to where it's only somebody who is stepping onto your front porch, or is only getting onto your back patio, and not just coming into your backyard to pick up a golf ball that they hit astray from the golf course. You can filter that down and to have fewer of those events, so that you can be knowledgeable and be aware of what's happening off of it without having too much distraction come from it.
Yeah. And I would say the other type is the person who's not particularly security conscious. They just want to know what's happening on their
Yeah.
property. And that could be kids out by the pool. For my wife, as soon as she knows somebody's coming over to the house, she turns on the cameras on our TV in the living room so that she can see when someone pulls up, so she can be a good host and go greet them. And so I think that's another really useful way of using them. But I do think it also kind of gets rid of the myth that security cameras are for people who are paranoid. Like, they're just a
Yeah.
nice way to monitor your space and to know what's happening.